Okay, I see a couple other people have popped in, so I would like to get this presentation started. So welcome to everybody who's tuned in today to the session, Career Conversations, reaching out to alums when you don't know what to say. And we really do appreciate you tuning in today and listening in today. This is a topic that we at the Lazarus Center get many questions about how to do this, what's the right way to do this, how to be effective with this, is it okay to reach out to alumni? All of those sorts of questions we get frequently. So by you tuning in and being here, we're assuming that you have similar questions to that. So we're going to do our best to give you some background, give you some thoughts, give you some actionable steps that you can take as you go forward in this process. Okay, so we do appreciate that you're here. I hope you will all bear with me as we go through this. I'm going to be switching screens a bit. I'm going to be working within my browser. Be patient. I'm still learning Zoom, as perhaps many of us are. And I will also tell you that my Wi-Fi connection at home has been very stable, but just in case I lag for a bit, hang tight. I'll be back as quick as I can. Okay. So I want to just start with a little bit of housekeeping for everyone here. So I think everyone should have their microphones muted by default. And if you prefer just to keep your webcam off while we're talking, just to save some bandwidth, great, no problem for that. We'll use the chat feature within Zoom if you do have questions or need some clarification on things. So please use that feature if you'd like. Certainly if something comes up during the presentation that you don't want to use chat for, you'll be able to email me or any of my colleagues afterwards, and we can address things that way. Okay, and also we are recording today's session. We want to be able to put this up on the Lazarus Center YouTube page pretty quickly so that it's available for other people who couldn't tune in today. Okay. And just so you know who's talking, so my name is Jason Bauer-Clapp. I'm the Associate Director of the Lazarus Center for Career Development, and my main job is as a career advisor to meet with students and recent alumni to talk about all things job search, internship search, career exploration, preparing for interviews, all of the above. And I work with students across majors, across class years. I do have a bit of a focus on working with the engineering students at Smith, so I've done some programming for those individuals as well. And joining me, my co-host today is Daryl. Daryl, do you want to say hello, introduce yourself?
Good day. Hi. I hope all is well with everybody. I like Jason, work with a cross-section of students about a number of different topics, whether it be just making decisions or internships. And my area of specialty would be more in applying to grad school, applying to law school, and the health careers. So again, definitely I welcome emails and questions from you all.
Great, thanks. And I see there are several other Lazarus Center staff on the call as well. So we've got kind of a collective groupthink that may be able to provide some support for you via the chat and beyond. So thanks everybody for tuning in. So what I want to try to cover today through our session is really to explore this idea of why making these connections and having career conversations, why this is so valuable and so important. Talk a little bit about ways to identify people to contact using both LinkedIn and the alumni directory that Smith College has. And then we'll talk a bit about how to actually reach out to individuals. Once you've found some people that you may want to try to connect with, how to do that, how to make that ask. And then provided you hear back from some people who say, yeah, I'd love to chat with you, how to actually approach those conversations, what to ask, what to say, maybe what not to say. And then really looking forward to, once you've had that initial conversation, what can you do to stay engaged? What's appropriate for staying connected? So Those are the main ideas that we want to talk about. For so much of this stuff, there is not a specific right way to do it. So what we're going to be talking about today are more best practices, ways that may be more effective ways to optimize your approach. Okay. So I want to start with this idea of why career conversations are so valuable. And I think, a lot of people reach out to us, a lot of students talk to us and say, look, it's all about who you know, and that's what makes for a good job search. And I would disagree with that. I think certainly it's who you meet, meaning the connections that you can make can be very powerful, very valuable. And I think about this whole notion of networking, career conversations, informational interviewing. All of these ideas are sort of like the superpower of the job search process in my mind. And number one, because I think of career conversations, talking with people in careers and industries that are of interest to you, it's like primary source research, talking with people who actually do the work that you're curious about, talking with them about the work that they do, about what it's like to be in their field, what the culture is like at their organization, what are the expectations of the role, how have they prepared for the role. I think that's really rich, substantive information that is different qualitatively than the type of information you can get from a company website or from job descriptions or from the wildly variable feedback you can get on Glassdoor or even on labor market information tools like ONET or MyNextMove or those types of things. So it's really this range of information that I think can be so valuable and so important. Okay, so this is part of why I think this is perhaps an underused resource by many students. So hopefully what we talk about today are ways to maybe help you feel more comfortable in how to engage in these conversations. And sometimes students talk to us and say, well, I don't want to annoy anyone. I don't want to be intrusive. I'm sure people are busy. They don't want to hear from me. I don't want to feel like I'm asking for favoritism or anything like that. And that's not what we're really talking about with career conversations and informational interviewing. What we're really talking about is finding people who have similar interests, people who are on maybe a similar path as you, but maybe are further along. Talking with them about their own experiences, what has worked for them in their search and in their professional path. And using that information maybe to guide, to inform, to calibrate your own decisions and your own plans. To be sure, any person you talk with is going to be a sample size of one. So, the information you get from one conversation may not necessarily be generalizable across the board. What has worked for one person doesn't necessarily mean that's going to work for you, but at least it gives you more of that firsthand perspective of how someone has found their way into a profession and what it's really like. And the more that you can have those conversations and get differing perspectives, I think can, again, just give you a much richer, more broad perspective on certain professions, how they might fit for you, what are good entry points, and that sort of thing. And also, sometimes there's this myth that, networking and informational interviewing, this is just something you do while you're a student or right after you've graduated. And that's not true at all. This is a process, networking, engaging with other people in your field or in fields you're interested in moving towards. This is something that you do throughout your career. It's just part of this process. And, there are various statistics that are thrown around about the number of job opportunities that are found through networking. The actual number may not be as important as just recognizing that a lot of people do find professional opportunities through their relationships. And some of those opportunities may be things that will never show up in a job database. Okay. Daryl, am I missing anything? Is there anything you want to add before we move forward?
I think you're hitting it right on target.
Great. Again, as we're talking here, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat box, and we'll pause at different points through the conversation here, and we can try and address some of those questions. Okay, what I'm going to try to do now is just give you a quick demo of two different sources that we recommend using for identifying people to reach out to. And this is focusing on alumni. And the reason for this is I think Smith is a pretty unique place in terms of the engagement, the involvement, the support that alumni broadly want to provide or want to offer to current students. This is the kind of thing that doesn't happen at every college and in every university. So Smithies want to be helpful to other Smithies. And sometimes the best way that they can be helpful is to share their story. Okay, so do really keep that idea in mind here. To be sure, alumni are not the only people that you can reach out to professionally. Sometimes you have contacts through family, through acquaintances, through professors. Sometimes there are people you reach out to, just a cold contact. That's okay too. And I think everything that we're talking about today could be applicable to those scenarios out as well. But when you start with alumni, you have that shared experience of Smith College. And that's a really powerful shared experience. And that can be your entry point as one of your talking points when you're doing some outreach. Okay, so what I want to do is talk about the Alumni Relations Alumni Directory. And for those of you who don't know, this is a tool that you can use as a student. You don't have to have graduated in order to access the Alumni Directory. And what I'm going to do here is, so I'm just moving some chat boxes around so I can make sure I can see what I need to see. So I want to talk you through this, and then I'm going to try to demo this for you. So for current students, the trickiest part, I think, for this is to simply get your username, get your login information set up. So I'm going to show you the step-by-step process here, and then we'll demo it so you can see what this looks like. So when you go to the Alumni Relations page, let me go back here. So the URL is at the top of the page there, and you would get to a screen like this, and there's this Alumni Directory button. That's what you're going to click on, and it's going to bring you to this login page. It will look a lot like this. You may be tempted to just immediately enter your Smith sign-on email and password. Hold up, stop, don't do that. If you haven't used this directory before, you need to find your username first. So that's the process that we're talking about here. There's a button right down below, find your username. You'll get an option to enter your name, your class year. It's going to ask you for your senior house. As a current student, don't put in a house. There's an option there for current student. And again, I'll show you this in just a moment. That's the trickiest part, I think, that most students have got caught up with because it's not the most intuitive. It's going to, hopefully, it's going to recognize you. It's going to give you an email address. And from there, you'll be able to ask it to reset your password. In the event it has an old email address or it can't find you, you can contact Alumni Relations and ask them to set that up for you. Okay, so that's the basic process. And I'm gonna try to go over to my browser tab so I can actually show you this process. So bear with me here. Okay, so Daryl, can you just confirm, are you seeing the Alumni Relations webpage here?
Yes, Jason.
Yep, thank you. Good. Okay. Excellent. So this is the Alumni Relations page, and I'll click on this button. Okay. So here's what we're going to do. is instead of entering in information, if you don't have your username and your password yet, you're going to go to Find My Username. Okay, and it's going to bring you up a box just like this. So you'll be able to enter your name, again, your senior house. In this case, we're going to put in current student. I'm actually going to just go through this process here with one of our student workers, Lily Campbell. She gave me permission to use this information here just for demonstration purposes today. And I promised her that I would not reset her password. So I'm putting in her name, current student, and I know that Lily is class of 2021. I'm going to click on Get Username. Okay, and we can see we have a search result here that's going to include a name. The username is an email address. Okay, now for those of you who do this for the first time here, probably most of you, the username it's going to give you will be your Smith email address. That seems to be what's most common. For some of you, it may give you an email address, perhaps a Gmail, or I've even seen people who have had like their high school, secondary school email address come up here, which may no longer be active. Okay, and if that's the case, you would need to write to Alumni Relations to let them know that you're trying to log into the Alumni directory, but they have an out-of-date username email address for you. They will be happy to change it for you. They will take care of it for you. You just may need to contact them. And similarly, if you do this search and you simply do not find your name, there's nothing coming up here. I've seen that happen sometimes with transfer students. So again, you may need to just contact Alumni Relations and they will set it up for you to do that. But if you do this search and you get a username and email address that works for you, it's an active address, all you would need to do is click on this reset password. It will send an email to that address to let you know how to reset that. Okay, so that's that process for how to get your login information and your password set up. The next thing I'm going to do is just to log in as me, so you can actually see once you're in the directory what this looks like. So I already have my login information and my password. And when you log in, you may see a page similar to this, and you'll have a few different options along this this menu bar here. Directory search is what you're going to want to look for. Okay, and once you get to this point, this is pretty straightforward in terms of identifying people. So perhaps you've talked with a faculty member who said, oh, you need to look up this alumna. I think she'd be a great resource for you. You can plug in that person's name right here. Perhaps you're interested in doing a search specific to your major. We could plug in a particular major here. I'm just going to plug in sociology, for example. And there's also this search by employment information here. So maybe I'm interested to see, are there any people in who majored in sociology who are perhaps in journalism work? Let's just do this search and see what comes up. Okay. And we get a pretty short list here. Looks like about 10 entries right here. By default, this will show the first 25 if there are more than that. So if you run a search and there are a lot of results coming up, you may need to filter more by location, by state, or by country or something like that. Okay, you can see there's kind of a mix of information here. We get names, we get class year, we get location. I'm just going to click on one here just as an example to see what level of data comes up. Okay. So we get a little bit of information here. Looks like we've got some employment information. Who's at the Huffington Post, graduated in 2012. Let's see if we have any contact information. Okay, looks like we have a Gmail address right here. Okay. So this is the process you might use if you're consulting the directory just to identify Smith contacts through here. Now, sometimes people have asked us the question of, if they show up in this directory, does that mean they've indicated that they are open to be contacted by students? And no, this is not filtered by people who have expressly raised their hand and said they're willing to be a contact. This is the best current information that Smith has broadly about alumni. Okay, but don't let that dissuade you. I've heard some great stories, certainly from students who have reached out to people that they found through the directory. And we'll talk a little bit later in this presentation about how to do this and how to do that effectively, to reach out, to engage, to ask for a conversation, okay? And sometimes you might send a message to somebody who either doesn't respond to you or says thanks but no thanks, and that's okay too. That's nothing that you did wrong, but do keep that in mind, that this is a pretty expansive list in terms of the directory, okay? All right, I'm going to move on actually to LinkedIn now to show you the search features within LinkedIn. So I'm going to click over to another tab and I guess I didn't log in here. Okay. Good. So I've just logged into my LinkedIn profile here. Now, students sometimes ask us, do I have to have a LinkedIn profile? And of course, the answer is no. Sometimes students feel like I have enough social media activity. I don't need another presence out there. And that's fine. Obviously, I understand that and I'm mindful of that. I would say, though, that LinkedIn is a very powerful networking and job search and internship search platform. It's a great tool. I think the number of users across industries and across professions is really high, and it's growing all the time. So I think it's a very powerful tool. It's just another tool, but I think it's a very powerful tool. And I think sometimes the data that you might get through LinkedIn can calibrate or maybe sometimes fresher data than what you might find on an alumni directory, excuse me. So it's useful to use both if you're comfortable doing that. And LinkedIn, I mean, certainly does offer, a premium subscription, a pay subscription. There's really no need for you to do that. The free membership is absolutely fine for the vast majority of users. Okay, so we're not going to do a deep dive into all features of LinkedIn here. What I specifically want to focus on for the purpose of this presentation is simply how to use LinkedIn to identify alumni. So when you go into LinkedIn and you have your profile set up, you can go to the search box here and do a search specifically for Smith College. And you'll see we have a few different options come up here, and first option in my bar is school. Okay, so I'm clicking on that here, and so it's linking to Smith College's LinkedIn page. But if we scroll down just a little bit here, and you'll see a button towards the left side, item number 4 in this menu, that is Alumni. They spell it with an I here. Okay, and we can see that there are just over 32,000 alumni, people who have identified that they attended Smith College who are LinkedIn members right now. Now, one clarification, that is also picking up current students. So the actual number of alumni might be a little bit smaller than this. So just kind of keep that in mind. But regardless, this is a big number of individuals that you can use to search. And as you scroll down, I'm going to click this show more here. You can see we've got a few different bars here that are indicating just some basic demographic information of where they live, location-wise, where they work, so companies and organizations. If we scroll over, what they do, so kind of general professional categories, career fields, what they studied. And you'll notice some of these don't align specifically with Smith's own terminology, but you can see the overlap pretty well with different majors and academic disciplines there. Okay, and what's pretty interesting about this is these are dynamic tools, meaning if we click on psychology here and give it just a moment, so it's now filtered by Smith alumni who studied psychology as reported in their profile. And then from there, we can see where are they located, we can see where are they working, Kaiser, US Department of VA, UMass, Behavioral Health Network, etc. Right? And then as we scroll down here, we're going to see who are those people. Right? So as you're using the different levels of filters, you can then identify LinkedIn members who, again, are alumni. You can look at their roles. You can click on individual profiles to see the work that they do right now and their past history. So this is really, really powerful. If we do a clear, for example, if you were just interested to see, are there any Smith alums who are at NPR, for example? So I'm going to just put in National Public Radio, and let's see, we've got where they work. There's a button right there, NPR. Probably no surprise, we've got a couple based in DC, since that's where NPR is located, and then a few other locations there. And we can scroll down and we can see those people who've identified that. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. Now, most people in their LinkedIn profiles, they may not provide their email contact information. So you may have a choice there of doing an outreach, making a connect request through LinkedIn if you want to reach out, or perhaps you use LinkedIn to get some names and then click back over to the alumni directory and look up those individuals through the alumni directory to see if they have email contact information. Okay, so before I move on, I just want to take a quick look at the chat box.
There is a question, Jason.
Okay, can you read it?
Sure. It deals with the alumni directory.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about would students who attended Smith for only a few years then transferred to another college be part of the database? And similarly, would someone who started at Smith but did not graduate, would they be part of the database as well?
Yeah, great question. My understanding is they would appear here, right? Because anything that goes into a LinkedIn profile is self-reported by that individual. And LinkedIn search, it's going to pick up people who, even if they attended 3 different colleges or universities, I think it will pick up all of those. So someone who maybe started at Smith and then transferred elsewhere, or someone who started elsewhere and then came to Smith. If Smith is in their school's attended section of their profile, I believe it would be picked up there.
Okay. And what about with our own database, with the Smith database? Will they be there as well?
My understanding is yes. My understanding is that Smith's sort of rule on this, guideline is that anyone who attended Smith, who enrolled and who actually attended Smith would be considered an alumna even if they didn't complete their degree.
Okay.
Okay.
That's the only question we have so far.
Great. Okay. So I hope that all makes sense, and you're welcome. And with LinkedIn and with the alumni directory too, I think, the trick for this is just getting into the system and just tinkering around, playing with it, testing different things. And that's just really how you get familiar with those tools. A little later in the presentation, I do have a link that I'll share with you that will direct you to some of LinkedIn's own training tools and tips. So that may be helpful for those of you who are interested in LinkedIn, but feeling a little unsure about how to proceed and how to set up your profile, that sort of thing. Okay, so I'm gonna tick back here to the slide deck. Just make sure I'm sharing this, okay? So we just talked through this process here. And again, if you have questions after this, or if you try this out and it doesn't seem to work for you, feel free to reach out to myself, to Daryl, to any other member of the Lazarus Center staff that maybe you've connected with in the past, and we're happy to help you out too. Oops, I find myself going backwards. Okay, so next start here is, let's assume you found an individual or found several individuals that you may actually want to reach out to and talk with them. And so a couple of tips that we would suggest. So in general, I think email is perhaps the best way to do this. Again, if you're identifying people through LinkedIn and you want to try to do a contact request and a connect request through LinkedIn, that's fine, but you may have less space to actually capture the message. So email tends to be the way to go for this. And what tends to work really well is just to be clear and be specific about what you're asking for. And the operative word here is that you're asking for advice. You're asking to have a conversation about someone, about their profession, and asking for their advice. I really believe that anyone who is successful in their career, no matter what industry they're in, at some point they didn't know what they were doing, right? So I think most people have empathy. They have understanding that people who are interested in trying to get into the field, they want to reach out. They want to benefit from existing knowledge. They don't want to reinvent the wheel, so to speak. So when you can reach out to someone and say, hey, I'm reaching out to, I'm really interested in the work that you do. I'm really interested in your organization. I'd love to talk with you. I'd love to get your perspective, and I'd love to get your advice. I think that's pretty relatable and understandable. And also, you want to make this personal. You don't want the person you're writing to feel like this is a spam generic message that you could have sent to 50 people all at the same time. But using the tools that we just demonstrated of LinkedIn, maybe looking at people if they have bios on their employer website, when you do this outreach, make it personal and try to clarify for them, here's why I'm specifically interested in talking with you. What is it about your role? What is it about your professional path? Make it personal. Make your audience feel like you've really done your homework, as the saying goes. Okay? And also, you want to be respectful of their time. And when you can do an initial outreach here and say, I would love to talk to you. I would love to learn more about the work that you do. And I'd love to get your advice. Could we set up a 15-minute phone chat or Skype chat? That's a pretty short time frame. That tends to make it easier for people to say yes. So, using these steps here, your audience will know who you are. They'll know what it is you want, and they'll know that you're being respectful and mindful of the fact that they're probably quite busy as well. Okay. So keep that in mind. And by the way, with this idea too, I think it's absolutely great practice to identify yourself as a Smith student, in your introductory message, to say, I'm studying, biological sciences, I'm a junior, and I found your name through LinkedIn, or I found your name through the alumni directory, or you know, Professor so-and-so recommended that I reach out to you. When you can identify that, that tool or that information source you used to find that person, I think that's helpful to include in this message as well. Okay, so what to ask during these conversations? So great, so you found some people that you want to reach out to, you've sent a message saying, I'd love to talk to you, can we set up a time? And that person has written back to you and said, great, yes, I'd love to talk to you, let's set up a time. And then maybe you're wondering, now what? How's this going to go? So here's a few suggestions. And this is really key. Again, you know, revisiting the ideas that we were just talking about, is do your homework. It's a cliche, but it's an important thing to keep in mind here. To the extent that you can, you don't want to go into one of these conversations and just ask this huge, generic, open question of, so tell me about your career path. Sometimes when you don't have a lot of background information on somebody, that's the way to start the conversation, granted. But when you can do a bit more work and start this conversation and say, you know, I know you've been at this organization, and I know you've been in this role for a few years now, and I know that you transitioned from a prior role in the organization. You know, when you can really signal to the person that you've done some investigation, you've prepared for this conversation, it really allows you to be more specific and more focused on what you ask, which probably is more interesting for the person, and also is probably going to give you richer information and more useful information. So for the next couple of slides, it's just going to be some examples of the types of questions that you might ask. Again, this is not the list that you must choose from. Feel free to think about your own needs, your own curiosities, what's helpful for you, what are you most wondering about when you talk with someone. And keep in mind, I think when you're doing these career conversations, I think most people actually kind of enjoy talking about themselves if they're invited to. So use this to your advantage. Make this conversation about them initially. So here's some of the types of questions that you might think about, or variations of these questions that might be helpful for you. So the first one, you know, can you tell me about what you've been working on this past week? Now, that's a variation. Sometimes people will ask a question of, you know, describe a typical day or a typical week on the job. And I can tell you that 9 times out of 10, somebody's going to say there is no typical week. So frame it more specifically. Put a time frame on it. Put a chronology on it, and say, you know, tell me about what you've been working on this week. And that's going to make it easier for people to really engage with that question and respond to that question. Certainly to ask things like, what do you like most about the role? What do you like, you know, most about the organization that you're working with? Asking people about their process, particularly people who are early in their career, but not exclusively so, to ask them, so once you got on the job, how did you go about figuring this out? What was that process like? Was it structured within your organization? Is this a lot of self-training? How did you really get yourself up to speed? Certainly to ask people, you know, if you were starting out now, how would you approach it? Would you do things in the same way that you did before? Maybe asking people more broadly, what makes someone successful in your field or in the role that you have? And that can be a really powerful question, particularly if you are anticipating a job search, or maybe preparing for interviews for a particular role that's pretty aligned with the person that you're talking with. You know, because when you're a job seeker, you don't want to just show that you are competent and capable of doing a role. You want to be able to show a prospective employer that you sort of get it. You have some more insider background information about the role, and really understand the key points and the priorities. And so a question like this during a career conversation of what makes someone successful in the field can really help you differentiate between competence versus really highly qualified and a really strong fit. Certainly asking about the culture of an organization, which is sort of code for how we do things at this organization. So asking people to describe the culture or describe the work environment, that can give you a lot of insight into what it feels like to be at a certain organization. Certainly asking people about their professional groups or professional associations. So these are groups, sometimes they're local, sometimes they're regional, sometimes they're national, sometimes they're even international, of groups that connect people in particular professions. Okay, and every profession in the world has one, if not more, professional associations that people can join. So sometimes you may be familiar with them as students, thinking about academic associations. So if you're in psychology, the APA, American Psychological Association, is a big one that links scholars and academics in that field, or the American Anthropological Association, or groups like, for any of you who are in engineering, groups like SWE, the Society for Women in Engineering, groups like that, okay? And professional groups are ways that people in certain professions stay current. They may offer professional development opportunities. They're really a good way to get the pulse of a certain profession. And by the way, many professional associations as well will offer job search databases that are specific to their field. And many of those you may not need to be active dues paying members of the professional group to actually use those job search tools. So keep that in mind as well. And also just more broadly, you know, as a professional in your field, given the work that you do, how do you stay current? What are the things that you pay attention to make sure you're up to date with the work in the industry and the field? So all this sort of information can be really, really rich and effective for helping you understand roles and understand opportunities well beyond any data that you might find through job descriptions or that type of thing. Daryl, am I missing anything here that you want to add?
I think you're hitting on a lot of the questions that I usually suggest as well. Sometimes depending on the field, I might also ask, are there other organizations or other types of organizations with whom they might collaborate or that they work alongside? Or sometimes even asking, who's your main competitor? You know, just to kind of get an idea of other players that might be within the field.
Great. Yeah, or maybe building off of that too, for any of you who are more interested in perhaps a nonprofit space or kind of helping professions, social service, that kind of thing. Maybe competitor isn't quite the right word for that, but perhaps asking people, you know, what are other organizations that do this kind of work? Who else should I be paying attention to? You know, so it may be a variation of that same question. Great. Thanks, Daryl. Okay, so we got a few other suggestions here. So, you know, certainly as you are engaging in a career conversation, you know, like I said earlier, you know, really making the conversation about them and learning from them about their experience. But certainly you can pivot that back to some of your own more specific questions too. So, you know, to ask, so, you know, if you were in my shoes as a soon-to-be graduate or as a sophomore who's just trying to get some initial experience, what advice do you have? What suggestions do you have for someone who's in my shoes? Looking back on when you started your career, sorry for the typo, you know, are there any things that you kind of wish you had known earlier on or things that you would have approached differently? Absolutely, I think it's great to ask people about their own job or search strategies, internship search strategies. You know, what has been effective for you in interviewing? You know, have you had any particularly challenging situations in your search process? Sometimes those questions can be really helpful as well. And absolutely, I think anytime you're engaging in a conversation with someone, towards the end of that, I think it's great to ask them, who else would you suggest I follow up with? Do you have you know, one or two people that you'd recommend maybe I can reach out to just to kind of continue the conversation on this? And if yes, you know, can I, you know, mention mention that you shared their name. And so that can give you that common contact. So when you reach out to this other person, you can say, hey, I'm reaching out to you at the suggestion of, and go from there. And so then you'll have that kind of shared familiarity with that outreach, and it makes it more likely for that person to then say yes. Great. Okay, so once you've had a conversation with someone, it doesn't have to be the end of that relationship. I think these conversations can often lead to more longer term relationships. That's what really networking is all about. And so here's a few quick ideas for this. So number one, just like on any interview, I think anytime you've done a career conversation or an informational interview, send a thank you message, and do it that day if you can. This could be 4 sentences. This doesn't have to be lengthy, but number one, just to acknowledge the time that someone took from their schedule to spend with you and to share their expertise is a big thing. And amazingly, a lot of people forget to do this or feel like it's not a big deal. And I can tell you it is a big deal for a lot of people. So send a thank you message. Tell them that you appreciated the time. Tell them that you appreciated the conversation. Maybe highlight 1 or 2 things that you found especially useful, especially helpful. Let them know what you're going to do with that information. I think is great. If someone is on LinkedIn and you haven't already connected through LinkedIn, it's totally fine to send a LinkedIn request. It's a great time to do it. And then, based on the nature of the conversation and the feel of the conversation, if it seemed like that person was really open to having continued contact, then I think it's entirely reasonable to maybe check in with them every month, every couple of months, to ask them about, how they're doing. Maybe if you've found a really interesting article or a news piece about their organization or about the industry that you wanted to share, that's great. Keep people updated on the work that you're doing. So this doesn't have to be a constant once a week type of thing. It can be a little bit less frequent. And in terms of if the person seemed open to continued communication, so there's not like a specific way to really assess that and evaluate that. It'll be maybe more of a feel. But if a person says to you as you're wrapping up your conversation, say, keep in touch with me, believe them and listen to them, and that's an invitation to stay in touch. If you're not sure, it's okay to ask as the conversation ends, to say, this has been great. I hope it's okay. Do you mind if we keep in touch over the coming months, just to continue the conversation? That's okay. Sometimes people will have a career conversation and the person they're talking with says, this has been a nice conversation. I wish you all the best and take care. The end. That may be more of a signal of, what, maybe this is kind of a one and done conversation. So again, kind of try to gauge the conversation, gauge how it's feeling with that type of thing. But in general, I think most people seem to be open to continued conversations there. So just kind of, I know we're running a little long on time, so thanks for sticking with us here. So this quote, actually, it comes from an alumna who graduated probably about 6 or 7 years ago, who was talking during a virtual panel that happened this past fall, I believe. And she was talking about her own networking process. And she made this wonderful comment of make a connection, not a contact. And there's so much in those 6 words that I think it captures the whole gist of how to do this work and how to do this outreach, and how to think about career conversations broadly. And I think the point of this is that you're trying to establish a connection and a relationship with another person. And we're all humans. We are wired to be social beings. Whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, connections with others is really important to all of us. And making a connection, not a contact, meaning don't approach these conversations as merely transactional, one-time things. You're trying to get as much information as you can in the shortest amount of time, and then boom, you're on to the next person. Okay, I mean, think about if you were on the other side of this, you wouldn't like how that feels. So think about being just truly curious and interested in the other person and their own experience. And that's how this process can really be effective for you and can lead to longer lasting conversations. Okay, so just some kind of follow-up resources that I'll point you to. So number one, on the Lazarus Center's webpage, we have a handouts and resources section with a number of PDF documents that talk about resumes and interviewing. And there is one that is specific to informational interviewing. We're kind of midway through the process of updating that and refreshing that, and we'll get the new version up as soon as we can. But even for now, the informational interviewing handout has great information. It provides a lot of background for the things that we talked about today. It does provide a list of some sample questions. It provides even maybe a guideline or a template for an outreach email you can use. So I'd invite you to take a look at that. And then also, for those of you who are interested in LinkedIn or getting on LinkedIn, but need a little bit more or would like a little bit more of some background how-to stuff, you can go to LinkedIn for Students. And in fact, if you just do a web search, LinkedIn for Students, this site here might be one of the first things that pops up for you. It's just a nice overview of different features, different tools. There's some video things, there's some short tip sheets. So I would invite you to check that out. And then just more broadly, you know, for everyone who is listening in on the call, please keep in mind that the Lazarus Center, we are still open for business, even though all of us as staff are working remotely. We are actively taking advising appointments. So we can schedule by video or by phone. And so that could be the range from, I'm just starting off, I don't even know how to think about my professional path, or I'm still sort of sorting out even majors and what that might look like professionally. Great, feel free to schedule a meeting with one of us. I would invite every single student, if you hadn't had an opportunity to do a practice interview, a mock interview, please think about doing that. So this is a process where you would schedule a time to meet with one of the advising staff at the Lazarus Center. And then we can go through the motions, kind of the basic process of what a typical interview might look like. And then we can give you some feedback of, here, this worked really well, please do more of this. Here's some things that you want to tinker with in terms of your responses. Interviewing is one of those things that you don't want to be figuring out in the middle of an actual interview when the stakes are pretty high. So practice ahead of time. We are happy to do this for you. And that's a special type of appointment that you can request through a handshake, is to do a practice interview. And by the way, you don't have to have an upcoming job or internship interview scheduled to do a mock interview. In fact, it might be better just to do a mock interview before you even have anything formal scheduled, just to get yourself in that mindset and get some practice ahead of time. So again, job and internship postings and some career information in Handshake. So anytime jobs or internships are sent to Smith to be posted with students, they go into Handshake. Certainly more broadly, the Lazarus Center website has a number of resources there. And then we also have a YouTube page where we've made a number of videos available, just some basic information there. Okay, Daryl, anything I'm missing?
I think you touched on everything that we want to reach out and talk about. The one thing that I always think about too when it comes to networking, I know when I talk to some students, they feel intimidated, or they're going, well, why would this person really want to talk to me? And I always like to remind them that at one point, their professors, the people who work in industry, the people who are working in not-for-profit organizations, at one point they were first-year students. At one point they were sophomores or juniors, and more than likely they also reached out to somebody and somebody gave them some advice. So it's almost their way of giving back by being able to do this as well. So again, like you said before, people like to talk about themselves. And when you reach out to somebody, you're kind of paying them respect. You're kind of paying them saying, I kind of like what you're doing, and I'd like to know more about that.
Great, thanks. Okay, so just by way of closing, I want to say thank you to everyone who tuned in today. And obviously we recognize sort of the strangeness and the uncertainty of the situation right now that we're all sort of making sense of. With that in mind though, certainly this is still a reasonable time and perhaps a particularly good time for you to do some of these outreach activities here of trying to engage with alumni out there. Just because things have gotten more uncertain in a pretty short amount of time doesn't mean that you need to stop your search or stop your exploration. And doing this work of reaching out to alumni, reaching out to other professionals to learn from them, to hear about their experience, perhaps even to ask about their perspective of what's happening in their organization or their industry, given the current circumstances, that could be really useful and illuminating as well. So don't hesitate to reach out. And echoing what Daryl said, sometimes alumni are actually really excited to hear from students. So you may not be intrusive at all. In fact, you may be doing them a favor by inviting them to talk about their experience and share their experience. So don't hesitate to reach out. And again, maybe use some of the ideas, use some of the suggestions that we talked about today. And so just in closing, Daryl and I are going to stay on the call just for a few minutes in case anybody has any other questions they want to share through chat. But before we go, I just want you to, each of you, to just think about what's one idea or one concept from today's session that you want to remember, that you want to make use of, just to capture that idea for yourself. And think about ways that maybe you can put some of this into action and perhaps put it into action even this coming week. And so just also in closing, I want to wish everyone best of luck as you kick back into classes and sort of spring semester version 2.0 next week. Best wishes. And again, we at the Lazarus Center, we are here. We are happy to connect with you. We are happy to support you and be a resource to you for this semester and beyond. So thank you all.